What is up, you guys? This is JP, and today we're going to talk about more sets with shorter rest periods. As you guys know, and I've talked about this before, is that I'm not the biggest fan of short rest periods. I'm not, again, the evidence just isn't strong for it. Now, like my previous video, and I talked about this before too, is that again, there's always a place for something, even short rest periods, even though I'm not the biggest fan for it. A lot of times it's just not practical to have crazy long rest periods for people who are busy and they need to work out. It's just something that you have to kind of match with your life. But one point that I've seen being brought up, and I kind of thought about it myself because it almost made me retract my position on rest periods, but there was a study done on it, and Greg Nuckols from the MASS team, and MASS is Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. It's a really good research review. I definitely recommend you guys check it out. I'm gonna give them a shout out whenever I can because again, they have a lot of good reads in there. But Greg Nuckols did a review on a study that talked about this. Basically, they had a few groups, and what the point of the study was is to see whether or not that you could have shorter rest periods for one group and you could kind of make up for the shorter rest periods by adding another set. Think about it like this. If you were doing overhead press and you have 3 sets, okay? And each set you have a 5-minute rest period. So you have set 1, a 5-minute rest period, set 2, a 5-minute rest period, and set 3, a 5-minute rest period. So it's 15 minutes of rest plus maybe 30 seconds, 20-30 seconds of lifting. Let's just say we'll do 30 seconds to be generous. That's a minute and a half. That's about 16 and a half minutes for you to kind of finish those 3 sets. Now, the kind of thinking behind shorter rest periods and why I'm not a big fan of them is, one is that when you have short rest periods, you're in a more fatigued state. So let's just say you're doing overhead press and you take a 45-second rest period or a minute rest period, which is very popular in kind of bodybuilding communities and people looking to gain muscle. What's gonna happen is, one, you're gonna be more fatigued. So if there's any environment for your technique to take a hit, it's gonna be when you have short rest periods. So you're kind of increasing the risk, from my experience, on having bad form when you have short rest periods. 2, you're by far definitely gonna get less volume, okay? So it's just, without a doubt, you can test this yourself. Like I said, pick any overhead press exercise, hit a set, wait 45 seconds, hit another set. Next time you work out, do the same thing, but wait 3 minutes. You're gonna be able to get more reps, and or you're gonna be able to add weight to the bar. So it's, without a doubt, it's gonna take a hit there. And then when you're looking at strength too, again, without a doubt, when you have shorter rest periods, it's worse for strength. So those were the kind of negative impacts that having short rest periods had. But again, I kind of ran into someone saying this and it made a lot of sense, and it still kind of does, but we have some evidence for it, is that you can just simply do more sets to make up for the lack of volume, specifically when it comes to hypertrophy. Obviously, that's not gonna help with strength because, again, your strength's gonna take a hit. But when it comes to, hypertrophy, volume is, one of the most important things when managed well. So when you compare the two, having shorter rest periods versus longer rest periods, you might think, oh, you can make up for the lack of volume that you're doing with the shorter rest periods by simply adding more sets. And this is what the study that I'm talking about that Greg Nuckols reviewed kind of goes over. And essentially what happens is you can make up for the lack of volume by doing more sets when compared to longer rest periods. So instead of doing 3 sets with longer rest periods, you could do 5 sets with shorter rest periods, and that might equate how much volume you have between the 2 examples, and then it might lead to the same amount of hypertrophy. And depending on how you structure the rest period, you might be able to get more volume doing shorter rest periods, and it might lead to more hypertrophy. Now, this study didn't exactly have that same setup, so we can't draw conclusions from the study about that, but that's what the study kind of came up with, is that when you have volume matched, you can make up for that lack of volume by adding more sets. Now, one thing that I want to talk about in this is that that doesn't mean, okay, it's like a check mark or a score for people doing short rest periods. That's why I kind of wanted to compare it and still say why I think that longer rest periods are so better. So if you take those 2 examples, someone with longer rest periods, someone with shorter rest periods, and you match volume by making up, doing more sets with the people with short rest periods, you got to think that, one, on some level, that would probably inhibit recovery versus the people resting or having longer rest periods. When you do a hard set, you take adequate amount of rest and you do another hard set. To me, again, if it looks, when I'm doing the set, it feels better to me, and when I'm looking at the set back, if I record it, it looks better. So even though you're making up the volume with doing more sets, when you have a lot of sets back to back to back to back to back with short rest periods, it doesn't really leave much room for you to kind of recoup and recover. So it's going to make it harder for you to recover. And again, I just think that's a negative impact of that. And to my knowledge, I don't think a study has done, that exact example that I've just mentioned and compare those two over a long term to see how the recovery holds up. So in my opinion, and my anecdotal experience, I would think that that would be a negative for the shorter rest periods. Also too, you have to think about the benefits of strength in there, because again, even though your goal is hypertrophy or you're trying to build muscle, I think that strength should be somewhere in your realm of thought, because when you can lift more weight, you can lift more weight sub-maximally. So if your 1 rep max goes up, your 10 rep max is probably gonna go up as well, which means again, in turn, you can intelligently increase volume over the long term. So again, even though you might be able to gain more muscle when you add more sets, I think that it's negatively going to affect strength in that manner. And then also too, from my anecdotal experience, I just think it's impractical to train like that. It's almost like in the realm of high repetitions. Yes, you can make adequate gains or make optimal gains with very high reps and low load, but that's not practical where you have, when compared to a more moderate load, moderate rep range set. So you got to think about practicality as well. You might come to the gym and be like, dang, I have to do, 5-6 sets of overhead press with 60 seconds rest in between, versus before you could have done 3, 4, 5 minute rest of overhead press and only 3 sets. To me, that's a lot more practical from just doing it aspect. So again, the question here was, can you do more sets to make up for, the volume lost when, compared to longer rest periods? The answer is yes. Is it practical? No. Would I recommend it? Not really. Are there specific instances where it might, still be needed? Definitely. But again, at the same time too, you got to think if your goal is time too, that might not be the best bet there either, because again, because you're doing more sets, it might end up being the same amount of time versus the less sets and longer rest period as well. So when you kind of look at the whole picture, again, it's still kind of in the same boat. I think that short rest periods have their place, but I think that making up for the lack of, quality of those sets and just adding more sets with shorter rest periods, I don't think that that's going to be very beneficial. If you guys have any questions, comments, leave them down below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.